Good morning, everybody. I'm very sorry that I could not be there in person. I am able to still speak. I want to thank IPA and IPC and the committee for allowing me to talk online today. I was supposed to be in person, like I said, but I had some issues with that. So today my talk will be about global regulatory framework for digital health medical devices, and we will see all these medical device definitions, how they evolved when software became a part of the medical device world, and how artificial intelligence and machine learning, those areas have also become part of the medical devices, and what is a device, what is not a device, and what do you need to do if you're a device, if you're not a device, what do you don't need to do along those lines. And we will see that there is a what's called a minimum viable product. I will create a framework. That framework has been used, and you can use it for globally. If you follow that framework, that you will be able to develop medical devices to be put on the market in various geographies, at least 90% or more. And individual geographies will have some variations that you need to address. So I just want to first address the market size of medical devices, and this is a global market. It is almost 600 and over $600 billion, and I was somewhat intrigued by this fact that we meaning here USA, spends about $4.5 trillion on healthcare spend. And somehow this value intrigued me because it's more than the GDP of India, which is three times the population. Somehow this is a little baffling to me. I think we need to work on cutting this cost, and it's possible. I think the reason I mentioned this is also because with digital health and AI ML creeping into all aspects of life, it is possible to contain this growth of this healthcare spend, but that may also still lead to growth in medical devices. So I just want to have an introduction slide, which really is about evolving paradigm shift and digital products in healthcare and life sciences, not just medical devices, but overall how it is improving and contributing to improvements in health and healthcare worldwide. So some examples we can talk about: sensor-based wearables that are measuring vitals for heart rate, pulse rate, respiratory rate, and SpO2, these things, measurements. And this is actually done during COVID more as a prescribed medical device than a consumer product like Fitbit and other things that were also providing similar functions. And then there is an image analyzer. Again, this came during COVID. I remember X-ray machines. X-rays have been scanned and by software analyzed for for diagnosis. Is it a pneumonia? Is it bronchitis? Is it COVID? Along these lines. And then there is robotics assisted surgery, which is also very prevalent now. And a lot of software goes into all this. Is the point of that. And then there is remote patient monitoring and virtual clinical trials. This concept definitely, again, in COVID, it is easy to go to a hospital, probably not get a bed, and even if you got a bed, it is not safe because it's extremely contagious and you will be infected. So for that reason, they have developed remote patient monitoring. When a patient goes to the hospital, they can basically be given these vitals measuring wearables, and they can monitor them from the hospital nursing station, but the patient will not be at the hospital, it can be at home. And this data is sent to the cloud, and where nurse station in the hospital can definitely track the patient from the using this data from the cloud. And if somebody's SpO2, for example, is dropping below 93, they can tell the patient, hey, you need oxygen now, right? Along these lines, these various examples are there, and real world data and real world evidence is a new trend that is used for clinical trials, clinical data to be substituted for regulatory decisions. So I have actually worked on one product where an intraocular lens used for cataract that is meant for adult patients has been used in children, between the ages of 2 to 21, and for making a label change, that data has been used as a real world data, real world evidence, because the ophthalmology surgeons have used in children. The reason for that is the lens does not change its size as the person grows from the age of 2. And that is again interesting fact. But then there is a notion of patient generated healthcare data. This is also used a lot more now for deciding in cancer treatments and other things how it affects the patient for the same drug, how the symptoms are there and how what other side effects are there, and they can definitely use that information to make drug discovery for cancer and all refined with that information. Then artificial intelligence is with machine learning is used in drug discovery to identify target molecules. So they have a lot of they start with a lot of molecules as potential drug candidate, and artificial intelligence uses that information available to reduce the number of drug candidates from almost they start with 1,000 molecules, and it's possible that they can come down to 5 or 3, and then they go through the clinical trials. And there is also a notion of organoid to bypass animal testing. This is also gaining currency. FDA and WHO are pushing for it, and this itself will definitely require 3D printed models and disease models. These disease models will be used. The reason for bypassing animal testing is because it's a wrong biology. I mean, what works in a rat or a monkey or a rabbit does not work the same way in humans, and it does not work the same way in all humans. The genetic differences and all will create the problems, the variants, and that's the reason for reducing the drug discovery times and costs for bypassing the animal testing. Then you have the continuous glucose monitoring and for type 1 and type 2 diabetes management. I think a lot of people are familiar with this. This is also, again, a concept that will use software and then measure the blood glucose continuously. And with type 1, especially, people can measure their current level of blood glucose and decide what they can eat and how much carbohydrate or anything that they can eat, and still inject themselves with insulin if the sugar is really high and bring it down. This continuous monitoring and diabetes management is done by type 1 patients. Then there is 5G in healthcare. 5G is, again, I'm talking about cellular, 4G, 5G kind of 5G. I have worked with a group. How do you use 5G in healthcare and what are the benefits? There are 10 times the current value of 4G. What it can give you is better safety. Definitely, the throughput is much higher, and the number of devices that can connect, the device density is much higher, as well as the latency, how quickly you can uh, transmit a large file. All of these are factors that are definitely enhanced almost 10 times or more if you use 5G instead of 4G. And this is actually useful in remote care and telemedicine. The reason for this is if somebody in poor neighborhood, they can't go to a hospital and it's very expensive, and also the distances they need to travel, especially in the US, is really high from rural to urban areas. Quite often nowadays they definitely think that using 5G, a lot of data can be transmitted and they can still get the better healthcare with the 5G. This is just an introduction of various flavors of how the digital health is being monitored, and software and AI ML is working in the healthcare space. So in all this, we need to consider, what do we need to consider? It's all going to be data, data, data. It's not that it's not been data in the past. It's just we are generating a lot more data now, and we have the capability. The technology is strong enough to handle large volumes of data. That's what I mean by that. Also, that a lot of data has to be handled, and we will consider other things down the road. So, a lot of connected devices are there. Connected devices and data also will create the necessity for cybersecurity. As we probably read every day in the newspapers that this company or that company's data has been compromised and the millions of accounts have been released, that these problems are there, so it's just something we need to be aware of. Then interoperability among the devices. This is really important aspect where interoperability has to be considered between different types of devices that share the data. And the use environments is really about point of care. Point of care would be the doctor's office or a hospital, and now home can be, because this remote patient monitoring is coming, home is an environment, and ambulatory is really various other outpatient aspects of use environment. In all this, we need to really consider that reimbursement, meaning getting paid for your medical device or a drug, has to be considered. If you don't get paid, there is no product. I mean, if you are going to be a medical device company or a drug company, you really need to understand reimbursement. So in all this, we need to also understand the regulatory agencies worldwide are moving to a notion called total product life cycle. Total product life cycle is a notion that will consider from developing the product and R&D to manufacturing, suppliers and supply chain, and you put it on the market. Then you need to collect the information about the device or drug's performance on the market, which is called pharmacovigilance in drugs and biotech drugs, and for post-market surveillance and medical devices. And this information has to be collected, analyzed, and look for signals and safety. All that information has to be fed back to refining the drug or a device. That is the view. The point in mentioning this aspect is they are now European Union Medical Devices Regulation, or IVDR, in vitro device regulation. They have completely changed the expectation they have from the medical device or drug manufacturer. Moving on. So I just want to give a few examples of artificial intelligence and software as a medical device. And there is something called IMDRF, International Medical Device Regulatory Forum, and they have a risk category. This risk category is used in deciding if the medical device is a class 1, class 2, class 3, along those lines, but also is used when a certain software as a medical device, for example, clinical decision support systems. They are not a device if the information is provided to a healthcare professional, trained healthcare professional knows what to do with that information. And if it is a patient who is not a healthcare educated, they do not know what to do with that information, they lower the risk. So along these lines, this categorization is used for making those decisions. Again, these examples here are already something we mentioned earlier, and the reason for mentioning this is just to see how these categories are applied. But I know we have to reduce time for presentation, so I'll move on to the next slide. So I want to consider the definitions and evolution of the medical devices. So here up to the middle of the page, ABC are the main aspects that FDA has recognized medical devices separate from drugs in 1976, and the highlighted underlined information here intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. So this is what is required to be considered a medical device. But also, if you achieve the above, in the C, you have this, which is not dependent upon being metabolized for the achievement of, primary intended purpose. So whatever is mentioned in B, if that is not achieved by metabolizing, which is by drugs. So they are trying to deviate from the drug definition that if you take a substance and that is metabolized and then you achieve a diagnosis or cure or any of that, then that is a drug. But if you achieve without doing any of that, then it is a device. The reason for putting this device definition is when software as a medical device, all these things came in the last decade, we are evolving these definitions of what is a medical device. There is a lot more statements are made about what is not a device than what is a device. What is a device? This ABC still hold, but we look at a few more examples here. Medical devices, data systems, MDDS, medical device, mobile medical applications, and clinical decision systems. FDA guidance has some of these documents that will give examples of what is or what is not a medical device. As I said earlier, there is a clinical decision support system that looks at data, and the person looking at the data, if it is a trained medical professional, they want to say there is no risk, so it is not a medical device. Whereas if it is a patient looking at the data and trying to make medical decisions, it is a device. But the manufacturer has the intention in their intended use saying that this data is provided for consumption of healthcare professionals and it is not a medical device. Along these lines, we can look at some more in the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. They have actually defined what is a software as a medical device as software intended to be used for one or more medical purposes that perform these purpose without being part of a hardware and medical device. So software only can be a device, but this is the definition of that. What does it mean? And also FDA has accepted that this International Medical Device Forum is a group of regulatory agencies worldwide. They come together and come up with these definitions so that they can accept a little more the same material when they submit to the regulatory agencies. So the bottom here, it says non-device software functions are not subject to FDA device regulation. So as you can see, the reason I put this slide is in the top it says what's a medical device. At the bottom it says what's not a medical device when it's a software. And the 5 categories are here, and we can consider a couple of them, like administrative purpose support and health care facility. Hospital information management system, for example, is not a medical device. Then for maintaining or encouraging a healthy lifestyle, if somebody uses the Fitbit, collect the data, and they're not sick or ill, that information, they can use it in whichever way they want, for how many steps they did today, how many calories they burned today, and they can look at their steps and the heart rate, pulse rate, whatever, but it's not a medical device. It's a consumer product, but can provide the same information. But intended use is what makes something a medical device. In that sense, it is not. Again, serve as electronic patient records. Electronic patient record is not a medical device, which is what we call the EMR and EHR, electronic medical record or electronic health record. And for transferring, storing, converting formats, if you have some X-ray or MRI and if you move them from one location to another, it is not a medical device. If, on the other hand, something can read that MRI and come to a diagnosis, then that will be a medical device. If it is a software that is written to, as we talked about earlier, the image analyzers, that will be a device, but this is not going to be a device. And to provide certain limited clinical decision support system. Again, we touched upon this, where if somebody is looking at that information, is a trained medical professional, then the risk is low, and so it's not a medical device. So to just expand on this, the reason that I put this slide is you have a definition of medical device, you have a lot more information about what's not a medical device, and that makes a difference in deciding whether your product is a medical device. If it is, then you have to do a lot more. If it is not, then you don't have to do so many things, which is required by the regulations. So the same expanded to AI/ML, which is artificial intelligence and software as a medical device. And there is a paper which is FDA published a position paper, and this is content from that, where they basically say artificial intelligence has various aspects. Generative AI is artificial intelligence, and machine learning is artificial intelligence. And they can be locked or unlocked medical devices. Machine learning can be locked, meaning it doesn't change the output for the same input. If it is unlocked, that means the machine is learning, and for the same input, you may get a different output. The reason for all this is all these things have to be thought through when you're designing a medical device, and then have to provide some documents for FDAs or any regulatory agencies you're submitting your documents to. So a few facts about how many AI/ML devices are there. We have about 882 devices already and none of them are using generative AI at this time. They're using only artificial intelligence with machine learning. Machine learning obviously will have a learning data and validation data. Both of them need to be maintained as part of the technical documentation with the device. And it's mostly in radiology that they have out of the 82. And then there are also what's called a 510K pathway, a regulatory pathway of these devices that's cleared by as a medical device by FDA. And there are concerns about artificial intelligence in general, and that's basically that they're inaccurate and they have bias and also low explainability and transparency. These two are the things that somehow need to be addressed. So the European Union and US government have issued AI acts. There are some things we need to consider from that to reduce the bias and
Sir, 5 more minutes for you, sir.
So we talked about the definitions and what all this, but now I want to give you a framework, which is what is called the minimum viable product
Dr.
from a
Ramakrishna,
regulation standpoint.
Dr.
What you need.
Ramakrishna,
Yes.
5 more minutes
Yes.
for you, sir. 5 more minutes for you.
Yeah. This is almost this, and I have one more slide.
Thank you.
Anyway, so the point of this is you assume by now you've gone through those definitions and you somehow decided your product is a medical device and now you need to build it, then you need to do all this following. And if you don't know what it is, FDA, you can submit intended use and purpose, and they will tell you something called a 513G, and they will answer if your product is a medical device or not. So given this, there is something quality management system regulation, which is again older version is called QSR 21 CFR 820. Now that is changed to 820 still, but QMSR, but it merged with ISO 13485 2016 version, and you need to comply with that by February 26. You have 2 more years for transition. But in general, building a product is you have to use something called design controls from the QMSR, which means you have a clear definition of a design plan and for your software product, and you have design inputs, design outputs, verification, validation, and then you do a design transfer for manufacturing. That applies to most medical devices, but a similar approach is also applied for software as a medical device. Then there is something called IEC 62304. This is a standard that you need to follow for software lifecycle process. That will basically tell you all the documentation you need to generate. Based on this, if you generate, you are compliant and the regulatory agency will be fine with that submission. You need to use ISO 14971 2019 version of medical device application risk management. This is a standard required, and you need to show how you identify risks and how you assess them, what are the harms from it, how do you mitigate the risks, and things like that. There is something called a UDI, a Universal Device Identifier, that is required again as part of this. And we talked about design controls above, which is design inputs and outputs to develop the product for verification and validation, and then you do the design transfer. And maybe people use agile methodology for software development, and that has to follow another standard called PIR 45. Usability again is extremely important. You can follow IEC 62366 standard, and this standard needs to be for all the use environment, who are the users and how it impacts the risk of using a certain way or not some other way. Then there is a HIPAA and GDPR. This is about privacy and security, and safety also can later on come into this. And there is a SOC 2 compliance that you need to have, and this is required again to build your product. FDA requires predetermined change control plan for AI ML devices. As I mentioned earlier, the logged and unlogged, for unlocked AI ML software as a medical device products, you definitely need to know how you will change your algorithms and you need to submit that along with your regulatory submission. This plan is required. Cybersecurity should be part of your medical device design. This is again required. We're going to see some more cybersecurity in the next slide. And need FCC-like authorities. How do you say your device is communicating in this band, frequencies and all that? You need to have that. If you have a wearable, then you need to have biocompatibility standards compliance. And you conduct clinical trials and clinical studies as required based on what your device is. And you prepare their dossier for submissions as you prepare all this content, and that's how you build the product and get regulatory submissions through the approvals. So I want to touch upon cybersecurity. Again, this is extremely important, and I can read through a few bullets. They really expect you to do something. There is a NIST 800.53 risk management framework that will be required to make part of your design and product development as part of the product and not something that is extra. This is emphasized by FDA significantly now, and also everybody else, all the other global regulations. So there is something called TIR 57, another standard. The point is, this standard will tell you if you have product safety and security, and then it'll be.
Sir, one more
you can
minute
have
for
security.
you, sir. One
Yeah,
more
I'm almost done.
We are
So
sadly.
all of this information is there in the FDA guidance is here. I put at the bottom, which is cybersecurity for pre-market submissions and also post-market guidance. You need to know and follow these two guidances from the FDA. So now we talked about what do you need to do for a minimum viable product, and then also consider the cybersecurity as part of that. How it's all coming together is AI/ML is used for drug discovery, and they're moving to bypass animal testing. We touched upon some of these things. There is a vision and strong desire to provide health equity to underserved populations. This is required. Actually, now FDA has given a guidance that it's almost mandating that they need to have diverse population in the clinical trials. FDA published also guidance, as I mentioned on this, that also gives a better human gene pool variants, how genetic variants, to design your drugs and medical devices. FDA is considering lab-developed tests as IVDs as in vitro diagnostic, which is devices, and this also is going to lead to the growth of devices. And patient-generated data, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be used, and that can lead to personal medicine along these lines. And IMDRF is now considering a program called Reliance, and this Reliance program is harmonizing global regulations. So this concludes my talk. I would be glad to answer any questions if you can contact me. I know we are running short of time, and I hope.
Any questions from audience?
I'm looking for point of care diagnostics in India for the last 15 years.
Yes, I'm in here, Rama. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
So
I'll stop sharing now. Okay. Go ahead, Nirla.
So thank you, sir.
One for giving me the time to address you. I wish I could have been there in person, but my travel plans could not be coordinated. So today I wanted to share with you some of the experiences that we have had over the last 5 years in bringing digital technology to the world of pharmaceutical companies, drug development, and clinical trials. To start with, I'll say a few words about Bioformis. We have been around since about 2016. We are approximately a little over 400 people. We have perhaps uniquely in the foundation of Bioformis was based on data science and AI. And at this time, we have over 21 different AI algorithms that we have developed. Many of them have been cleared by the FDA, and I'll speak about those some of those algorithms in the context of clinical trials. Yeah, we have serviced 100,000 patients over that number in the context of both healthcare as well as clinical trials. and raised a substantial amount of money. So we are a very well-funded organization. The kinds of companies that we work with that I would like to highlight, I'll start by highlighting some of the pharmaceutical ones. So, for example, we have Kite Pharmaceutical, we have Chugai, which is a subdivision of Roche Pharmaceutical, we have Mundi Pharma, we also have AstraZeneca, BI, Pfizer, Amgen. These are all customers that have been using our products in the pharmaceutical space for over the last 5 years. As you're about to learn, we also have a substantial healthcare business using similar technology. And we have some big customers over there, Mayo Clinic, Orlando Health. We are partnered with GE Healthcare. They sell our solution into the same healthcare market, etc. And as I mentioned earlier, we are funded by strategic investors in this space. General Atlantic, SoftBank are our big investors, but you also see CVS Health and Mayo Clinic as other kinds of investors who are sponsoring our work. It has been a privilege to work for Biopharmas and in this space for over the 5 years, and I'll share some of my learnings in this presentation. As I mentioned to start with, we actually have two substantial businesses. On the left side, you see the ability of using medical devices for remote care management. Not just remote monitoring, but also care management. The kind of question that was asked earlier with respect to in India, there are tools and technologies, as is there in anywhere in the world. People take care of health situations at home in many different ways. So how do you now shift it primarily? When I joined Biopharmas, it came as a bit of a surprise to me that the whole idea of a hospital is actually relatively recent. We all know, especially in India, I grew up there, the doctors coming to the patient's house was a very routine thing, certainly in my parents' generation. It was really only around Florence Nightingale's time, World War II, or World War I time frame, slightly before that, when the X-ray machine was invented, that it actually required a central place for patients to go to, because an X-ray machine back in the day was not a transportable thing. So that is why they actually created the idea of a hospital. And Florence Nightingale herself said that this wartime phenomena of a hospital is somewhat unusual, and she actually anticipated that the idea will disappear as soon as the war is over. And here we are, that most of our care is suddenly shifted to the hospital, and very little of it is done at home. What we see, of course, is that care is shifting to the home, and what we need to do is use technology to really tap into that. So it's shifting back to the home side. And then on the right-hand side, you see that pretty much the same technology is being used in the clinical trial space, and I'll spend the rest of the presentation talking about our learnings over there. Yeah. Here are the barriers that everybody is running into with respect to pharmaceuticals and drug development. So we have statistics such as the fact that only 3% of adults with cancer, for example, are able to actually participate in a clinical trial. 75% of them actually say they were willing, and they're actually eager to. You can imagine in so many cases that it's the last line of defense that many of the patients have. Of course, you can imagine that they would be ready to participate in a clinical trial if it gives them hope with survival of the new drug and so on. Yet 75% of them are willing, and only about 2 or 3% of them actually make it into a clinical trial. Here's some other interesting statistics that we have seen from many of our big customers. 60% of clinical trials are delayed or terminated due to lack of enrollment. They are sponsored, they're funded, they start, and then due to lack of proper enrollment, they're actually canceled. Think about the amount of lost potential over there. And here's something that is particularly nasty, right? Even once a clinical trial starts, almost 30% of the patients drop out of clinical trials, either due to it was inconvenient, they didn't understand what was involved in the clinical trial, they are not in one way, shape, or form, didn't really understand what the clinical trial would entail. And sometimes there are financial barriers to any of some of these things. Now you can imagine the risk to an ongoing clinical trial if after enrollment the patients actually drop out. Once again, the clinical trial will not meet its goals, and a very expensive trial could actually get cancelled. So see, these are some of the challenges that we are seeing. I hope or I suspect many of you will recognize these particular kinds of problems. Yeah. On the other side, we have health systems. As many leading health systems are eager to participate in clinical trials, but they find it very difficult to engage with the pharmaceuticals in an organized manner, right? They have the patients, right? You can imagine cancer patient has come, they've had the first and second line of defense. The clinician knows about a clinical trial. How do they now connect the patient to the clinical trial? They are in a best position to do so. In many cases, the systems don't actually exist to allow them to do that. Yeah. As Rama mentioned earlier, diversity and so on, especially at the FDA, at the worldwide regulatory level, is becoming increasingly important to seek a clearance for any of these pharmaceutical new drugs and so on and so forth. Yeah. Without that, clearance is going to become an increasingly difficult hurdle to achieve. Yeah. Those are some of the concerns that pharma and biotech are facing. In all of this, as you can imagine, technology and digitization has a very unique and powerful way to solve some of these problems. So I'll talk next about what you should look for and what we've ended up building. I'll try not to make this an ad for Bioformis. My intent is to inform and share our learnings. By all means, please look around for solutions that meet some of these criteria. The first and foremost thing that I would ask that you learn or you take away from my presentation, right, is that you need to look at it from a 360 perspective. You think about it from the entire digital or entire clinical trial perspective, and then come back, go down from that high level to design a system and all of the elements that you would need. So again, I'll pivot on a great question that was asked of Rama, right? In India, there are very specific situations. People may or may not have access to certain kinds of technology. People have certain devices and so on. That's fantastic. You know that about your patient population. That's a very powerful piece of knowledge. Incorporate all of that information into your plan for a digital or digitized clinical trial or decentralized clinical trial. My own mom, she's 83 years old at this point. She lives in Mumbai. But guess what? She's an extremely proficient WhatsApp user. There's really no reason why WhatsApp should not be a key or a primary element of how you incorporate someone like my mom into a clinical trial. So the first element that we have seen that digital and decentralized trials can help with is around the enrollment and creating and reaching out to a much broader set of participants than you would have normally been able to reach out to. You can control the diversity, you can reach out to a much broader set of population. And as you're about to learn, if you do it right, if you select the right kind of platform, you can increase the compliance, you can decrease the dropout rate, and overall reach out to those 75% of people who wanted to participate in a clinical trial but were not able to. Once you've identified the patients, then you also want to think about how are you going to enroll those patients into your clinical trial. That's again over there. There's a whole idea of consenting. Consenting, many people think that is really an act of legal protection and so on and so forth. But in actuality, it's actually a very practical thing where the patient is trying to be informed on exactly what they have to do. Oh, every Tuesday I do have to go to the lab and get this test done. Otherwise, the clinical trial will not be compliant, etc., etc. So it's really a matter of patient education that you really need to think through, right? We already talked about virtual data collection. I'll talk a little bit more about what we have learned. Again, excellent question earlier about what do you do about the fact that in India devices are different and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about the platform and so on. And then we'll talk a little bit about virtual assessments and the power that digital technology is able to bring to the world of clinical trials. Here are some of the challenges and the opportunities in the different phases of a drug development or clinical trial. Yeah? On the first side, on phase one, what digital technologies really allow you to do, in addition to getting you the right kinds of patient populations and so on faster and better, it allows, especially if you include the use of digital biomarkers, AI/ML tools and biomarkers, it allows you to really very quickly, first of all, understand and experiment with dose titration. You can dose the patients, the subjects, and then you can use biomarkers to understand the effectiveness of those, and you can control the dosing in a much more real-time manner. You can also, the entire idea of fail fast. If there are unsuitable candidates, you can eliminate those much more quickly if you have the addition of digital biomarkers and digital technologies incorporated into your clinical trial. When it comes to phase 2 and phase 3, that's where the ability to collect real-world data, Rama spoke about that earlier, becomes extremely powerful. Not just powerful, but as the guidance, the regulatory frameworks are moving in that direction, where you're going to be required to show, okay, it's not just your lab-based clinical data, but what's actually happening with the patients when the patient is in their natural environment, when they are under management with your...
Dr. Milan, 5 more minutes for you, sir, please.
Okay. So I'll zip through this very quickly. And then finally, once you get into the marketed drugs, you're able to use real-world evidence and use the pharmacological or post-market surveillance functions and accomplish those using digital technologies. Yeah. When you come, once you have looked at these elements of digitizing your clinical trial, you really want to think about two buckets of things. One is the digital endpoints that you're going to be going after that will help you with your drug development. And then, as I mentioned, how do you take other elements of clinical trial and really digitize and decentralize them? Two very different objectives of a digital technology that can help you with clinical trials. Here's a published study that actually shows the ROI of investing in a digital platform for conducting clinical trials. The returns are just mind-boggling, right? Especially when you get into phase 3 and so on. The ROI is definitely there, and we are certainly seeing that. Our customers are certainly seeing that, hence the success that we have been experiencing over the last 4 years. Very quickly, what you're looking for in a platform is something that is very efficient at collecting data. Again, I'll pivot back to the original question about there's all kinds of different devices in the home, in any geography. How do you collect data from there? How do you process it? You want a platform that allows you to develop biomarkers in a compliant manner. And then how do you actually take the outputs and use it to improve the patient outcomes, the patient retentions, and end up with significantly cleaner and richer data than you would have been able to do so without the help of digital technologies. I'll save us the bioinformatics pitch over here. The final thing in terms of an overall platform that I would ask you to think about is the fact that you really need to think about the ecosystem around the digital platform. You want to think about the kinds of devices and sensors that are integrated. You also want to think about whether clinical operations are associated with this particular platform for safety monitoring, for help with that, right? You want to understand the regulatory compliance posture of the solution that you're considering. You really want to focus on the patient experience and the patient support and engagement. You want a central clinical trial as a sponsor, as a site, and then you want a patient experience app in the middle. And then you want something that, a platform that is going to allow you to take all this data and really develop data sciences, AI, ML solutions on top of that. Yeah? Very, very quickly, I'm going to talk about this platform that allows you to take the data you collect and develop AI algorithms. Look for a data lake is really the big takeaway from this particular slide. Data comes in, it accumulates into a very large data lake, which can then be used for developing AI algorithms and so on. Make sure that when you're selecting a platform, it allows you to do that. You really do want these 4 big elements. You want the enrollment and consenting functionality. You want a rich set of connected sensors that make sense for your target population. You want a way to collect PROs, a customizable way to collect PROs, and you want virtual visits. This is an incredibly important thing to make the patient feel connected, to keep them educated as they go through their clinical trial. Yeah. Various, our own platform as well as other platforms out there will give you access to a rich set of data, everything from wrist-worn devices to patches, to armbands, to episodic devices like weight scales, blood pressure cuffs, spirometers, etc., etc. When you're looking for a platform, make sure that it is an open platform that is able to integrate with devices from various manufacturers. Yeah. There's a device selection is an extremely important element of the puzzle. You want to design which kinds of devices you're going to get in there. The more devices you have, the patient compliance drops in. We have actually found that beyond 2 devices for the patient, they will just not comply with your protocol anyway. So you want to try and limit it to 2, maximum 3 devices. Here's another element of a platform that you should look for. Look for something that gives the sponsor and the site a 360 view of the clinical trial, allows them to actually enter and digitize the entire schedule of assessments in a single place, and then maps it into tasks for the patient. So the patient is given tasks on a daily basis, saying, oh, a week from now, we're going to be going in for such and such test. Make sure that you have your travel and your schedule ready to go ahead and participate in that test or whatever it might be, etc. Right? So tasks are presented to the patient, and meanwhile, on the sponsor side, they get a 360 view of all the subjects and where they are in that clinical study to get an assessment and to increase the compliance over there. E-consenting, as I mentioned, super important. You want to make sure that it allows people to understand exactly what their obligations will be. And
one more minute, Milan sir. One more minute.
One more minute. In our case, e-consenting allows you to present tests to the patient so that they know, or that they have actually understood their obligations. You want the PROs to be completely customizable, and you want a central way of figuring out what the PRO answers are. Extremely important for compliance purposes. As I mentioned, virtual visits allows you to keep the patient engaged and compliant with the clinical trial protocol. And finally, I will talk about the biomarkers in the last few seconds. Look for something that avoids some of the hazards that Rama was talking about, biases, for example, and explainability, right? One thing that has worked really well for us is to develop personalized digital biomarkers, right? So in other words, the biomarker is designed so that it actually captures baseline data from the patient itself and then applies machine learning techniques to then predict disease progression and disease or drug efficacy. That eliminates the entire concept of bias in the first place because the entire algorithm is working off of the patient's own data. So bottom line is look for a platform that has a 360 view. It has the devices you need. It has e-consenting. It has PROs. It has virtual visits, and it has a study builder. Those are the big things that we have seen. Gives you a platform that allows you to effectively and efficiently digitize a clinical trial and really take clinical trials to the next step. So I'll stop there. Thank you again for the time. I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Milan sir, for wonderful this presentation.